Applied Teaching Topics, Tools and Tips for Testing, Module 4, Unit 1. So, why should we test our students? To punish them? To give them pain and suffering? No. We want to test our students so that we can get feedback on their learning and give them feedback on their learning. Tests can also motivate students to study. There's a test coming up, so I need to study. And of course, we need to give students grades. And it is possible to give bad tests and good tests, so we need to learn a little bit about test making and how that's done and what are the principles of making good tests. My name is Professor Joseph Polshock, and this is Elemental Linguistics. So test-taking basics. First thing is reliability. Is your test reliable? Reliable means that the test gives consistent and stable results. If you take a letter to the post office and you have them weigh it for you and they say that will cost you $1, and you say, oh, I forgot my money, and you go to another post office when you got your wallet and you put it down and they say it's $10, that's not reliable. It's not consistent results. For learning, it would be like this. If learners repeat the same test without more study, they should get about the same score. The test is reliable. And so the question is, how do you make a test reliable? Well, here are some basic rules for making reliable tests. A reliable test should have at least 30 questions. You have enough information to measure the student's ability or progress. They need to have familiar question types, so the learners need to know they need to understand the question. They need to be familiar with the kinds of questions you're asking them. The instructions for the test need to be clear, simple, and consistent. So that, in other words, consistent means that every learner gets the same set of instructions. We need to mark each test in the same way, so you have standards for marking. If, for example, it's a writing test, you have a set of guidelines and rules for measuring the writing skill. And if more than one person is grading the test, they need to be trained in those standards to mark the test in the same way so that it's reliable. And the testing conditions need to be the same for everybody in the classroom, right? So for everybody you're testing. So if one group of students sits outside under a tree holding their paper in their hands and another group is in a perfectly quiet classroom, the conditions are not the same. So we need to make the conditions the same. Also, learners need to take the test seriously, right? They need to take the test seriously. For making tests that are reliable, these are some important rules or guidelines. Another basic aspect of testing is this concept of validity. And it's good to memorize what validity is and remember it. The test measures what it claims to measure. So, for example, a reading test measures reading, and it's not a valid reading test if it measures a bunch of listening as well. You could have an integrated skills test, and that would be different. But if you're saying this is a reading test and you have a bunch of listening, then it's not a reading test. Or if you have a listening test and it requires a bunch of listening, then it's not really a listening test, is it? So the simple question is, what are you trying to measure? That's validity. It measures what it claims to measure. Another important point about testing is this idea of practicality. Keep it simple. So tests need to be practical. They need to be easy to make, relatively easy to make, and easy to mark. So for example, one thing that can make a test easier to make, let's say you have a multiple choice test. You have a question. What is the meaning of the word hope? And then you have choices, right? If you have 4 choices, that's harder to make than 3, but actually 3 choices gives you about the same result. So it's easier to make if you just use 3 choices instead of 4. And also you need to make it easy to check, easy to correct. it should be easy to understand the results. What does it mean? What do the results mean? And it should be easy on the wallet. In other words, the test shouldn't be expensive. It shouldn't cost too much money. And it should be easy on the clock. In other words, it shouldn't require too much time, or you need to have enough time to do the test. So one thing is we've got reliability, validity, and practicality, and they kind of put pressure on each other, so you need to balance these three concepts. When making tests, your computer can often help you. Steve Jobs said that the computer is like a bicycle for the mind. Bicycles help humans move faster, right? Maybe the computer is more like a racing car for the mind. But the point is, the computer can help you. You can get testing software or use online tools to create your tests. So for example, the famous English or the famous vocabulary website that I often use, LexTutor, has a CLOZE test making function, which is really nice. You can use Google Forms. Those are usually free. Or you can use a spreadsheet and use, like, have the question in one column and then 3 answers in the other columns, and then copy and paste those into a Microsoft Word document so that you're working with a database of questions that you save and keep, so that you don't have to keep making the same test over and over again. Save all of your test questions in Excel, for example, in a spreadsheet, for example, and then you have a database of test questions that you can use for the many years that you might be teaching. So you need to make a database and have a workflow so that you make a system for making your tests. And one simple way to do that is to use spreadsheets. You can do it that way. One software application that I use on my Macintosh computer is called GAPT, and you can make CLOZE tests with this software. In this particular example, I have a test, I have a text, and every 8th word, I think there's a blank. So count them. An old man was fishing alone in. So the 8th word is deleted. Every 8th word is deleted. It just automatically deletes every 8th word. That's the nth word style of making a CLOZE test. This could be a listening passage. So you're mixing reading and listening. And if that's your goal, then that's fine. It's also possible for students to answer this without listening, but it might be easier to do just a reading version of the CLOZE test with what we call a C test. So here's the C test, and this one you can see how it's made. Every other word is deleted halfway, but each letter has a blank. So a lion was awakened from sleep by a mouse. Rising up in anger, he caught him and was about to kill him when the mouse pitifully entreated. So you can kind of see how you can get the answers without hearing it. This is a C test, and that's a really good way to measure proficiency. Easy to make and very reliable. So that's another example of a test that we can make with computer software. Finally, one simple kind of test also is a dictation test. So you can dictate a passage of 50 or 60 words that you want to test the students on, make sure it's the right level. You can use an audio recording or even an AI voice. Your computer can generate the audio and you can save that as a file. And if you're going to do a dictation quiz or test, you should probably accept some misspellings in advance. If it's understandable but misspelled a little bit, you might be able to have a list of accepted misspellings. And so a dictation is a very simple and quick way to make a test that can work for listening. That is all I have for today on the idea of practical, valid, and reliable test preparation. I hope you find it helpful. Thank you for listening.